All right, everyone. Good day and welcome to this PIMVendors.com webinar. I'm Stephan Spijkers. I'm one of the co-founders of PIMVendors.com. Today, here we're going to discuss product data and artificial intelligence together here with Philipp from Partium. Before we get into introductions and into the meat of the discussion, first a few short housekeeping topics to discuss. We are live streaming, but if you have to leave early, we'll be recording this session and we'll be publishing a full recording later. So you can watch it back if you have to leave early. And the second one is that if you want, and we would like to have it, it's an interactive session as we are live. So you can drop your comments on the right-hand side here on LinkedIn and ask any questions you have to me, to Philipp, just live during the call, and we'll try to pick them up during the conversation so that you might have, well, you'll definitely have more knowledge after the session ended, but maybe some answers to your questions as well. And if you don't dare to ask those questions publicly, because that happens, I'll make sure to share my LinkedIn details and those of Philipp's as well during the call, so you can probably find us on LinkedIn independently as well. But you can reach out to us anyway and ask your questions there. Now, today, again, I said I'm here with Philipp. Philipp is the Chief Revenue Officer at Parsham. Philipp, could you maybe do a quick introduction of yourself and explain what Parsham actually does in the product data ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephan, for having me. I'm really excited. I mean, this was a bit of a spontaneous decision for us to have this webinar, but yeah, thank you for having me because we're a bit of a new player in the market. My company, or the company I'm working for, Partium, is essentially a company that started a couple of years in the part search space, right? I mean, we were one of the first companies in the market that is still offering a very advanced part search suite, so to say. So you can snap a picture of a part, you can, use all sorts of like fancy, semantic searches and then options to identify spare parts. And the reason why we actually got about developing this product was because we started working with companies like Bosch or like German Railways and stuff like this. And what they all have in common is actually incredibly poor parts data, right? So from our perspective, we got to look at it. We wanted to offer them an option to search for a part relatively quickly. And they had this great vision of being able to snap a picture and get down to the part. But, that's incredibly difficult if you don't have a lot of parts data on file. So we made it work, but ironically, a couple of years ago, we started to ask ourselves the question, why are these guys buying our software? And if they all have in common that they have terrible parts data, then shouldn't we do something about parts data? And now I say pivoted because I think we expanded the product more towards it. If we can use AI to find part, why can we not use AI to enhance parts data? And, that's where we are. We are a company that really is working with big, mostly enterprise customers, to apply our proprietary AI and our data and stuff like this to, to get them to have better parts data and work with that data in a better way.
Yeah, I think it might be easier to explain what you do in this world with ChatGPT in the wild and being able to do a lot of the capabilities, attempt the capabilities that you just described. If you maybe dive in a bit deeper into that pivot or where you started and how that intersected with the product data challenges that were faced by your customer, like how did that come about? I mean, that doesn't start with ChatGPT, right? That's, I think, what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I think ChatGPT is a really good keyword though, because for us it was I call it kind of the ChatGPT moment before ChatGPT entered the stage. Everyone was like, is that really going to work out? What can I do with AI? And people were actually relatively skeptical, you can imagine. And then there was this moment when ChatGPT launched and everyone was like, wow, that's crazy. You can do all these things. I think the outlook of the industry, and especially in the B2B space changed overnight, where people started messing with ChatGPT and then started to apply it into not just their private life, but also, their business problems that they're about to solve. And for us, I think it's a good point. Like, how would you describe this in terms of like ChatGPT and what ChatGPT can do? If you think about it, if you drop an image of a part into ChatGPT or into any kind of Gemini, what have you, right? And you say, what is this part? It's actually getting you relatively far, right? It's getting you, it will describe it. It will use all sorts of information that it sees. It will actually, because, they are exposed to billions and billions of pages, knowledge and stuff like this. It will actually tell you a fair share amount of information about a part. And most of these you don't have in your SAP. So this is kind of like the nature of how it is, right? Once you start Googling, you get a lot of information. Once you start tapping into that kind of world knowledge, you get a lot of information, but, arguably that information isn't present in your parts data, the stuff that you actually work with, PIM systems, SAP. And what we did is, even before that, we kind of had the same methodology in a sense that, like, if you expose Partium to your parts, or you use Partium with your parts, it actually gives you kind of the same moment when it starts to understand what it is, what it sees on the image, what it actually gets from the catalog. It references its own data points, its own catalog. It will also go out on the web and source information. And then it will start putting these information data points together into like a better, more curated data set. Of course, it has all sorts of capabilities from VLMs, LLMs, and, you'll be able to essentially click it together in a way that, data comes out of it that you want to work with. I think this is a good way of looking at it. We build it in a way that it will just help you with this stuff. We build it for humans, right? And so, because I think when it comes to AI, one of the reasons why everyone loves it so much is because it helps me in the moment with the problem I have in the moment. And that's, kind of the premise that we put into Partium when we build it.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of things in that answer I would like to touch.
Yes.
I think maybe if you could compare and contrast that to, like you mentioned, ChatGPT, but I think there are some other approaches in the market, basically, right? Where we have seen approaches where you just take the image and you reverse image search that image on Google or whatever database or data set the solution has, uses that to come up with a new product description. And that works if you have Adidas sneakers or if you're selling another product that is well known in the market and maybe easy to detect or easy to find. But if you are dealing with parts that hardly have any product data on the public internet, let alone have good quality images or are just indistinguishable from each other, right? Because it's a ball bearing is a ball bearing is a ball bearing. And that's, for me, as someone that doesn't know a lot about ball bearings, that's the case. But if you reverse image search a ball bearing, you'll get lots of ball bearings. But yeah, most likely not the one you were actually reverse image searching. So that is one approach, right? Just a pure reverse image search approach, and then maybe sort of cleansing and structuring that data. Could you sort of differentiate between those types of approaches, like in addition to the pure reverse image search, the asking a large language model? Like, what are the types of approaches you see?
It's a good point, because I think when I look at it, none of them by themselves work. So it's almost like you look at a combination in order to make it work, because it's really what you said, right? You have simple parts, super simple parts. You have data sets that are more robust and you can work more with it. And then you have excruciatingly difficult parts to identify. I'm not even talking just like OEM parts, but what if you really in your parts description only have, like, in your parts there it says, I don't know, bearing? It's tough, right? So the thing is, you can Google challenging, you can look into a parts catalog, maybe one that you curated yourself. There's various degrees of like confidence, various degrees of like, of volume. There's also, let's just call it a temporal depth, like, so to say, what if the part is obsolete and you don't have it in your catalog, issues of that nature. And if you look at a SAP parts master with 2 million parts, then you have actually a lot of these kind of problems, from it's super simple, let's do it, all the way to, oh my God, what are we going to do about it? And if you think about it, humans solve it, right? I ask my customers early on, how do you do it right now? And then a lot of them will say, look, I Google, I call someone, I look at pictures, I look at documentation. And what we did is we kind of, over time, and arguably we started pretty basic, right? But we tried to incorporate basically workflows, or like things that humans do, into the AI. And then, to the extent of, for example, if you, Stephan, went ahead and you would say, look, I'm Ruth, I absolutely need this part. And you would Google for 45 minutes, right? you would probably come up with a result. But who has time for this? Well, AI does, right? If you think about it. So if you take a catalog like this, you pump it into the AI, we will look at a catalog that we have available. We will Google, or like we will look at like data that's out there. We will extract information out of images and see what we can do about. We will analyze like documentation. And it's almost a sequential thing, right? Where you say, okay, it's a simple path. Let's just like grab the data that's available because that just makes sense. But as you advance in complexity, so to say, you just have to do more, and it will take a lot more, and it will take more compute. But it doesn't matter, right? If like the AI runs for forever or like for 45 minutes, if you get the result return that you want. And so I guess when I look at like approaches, I think catalogs are out there. It's challenging from a catalog perspective because unless you're able to match incredibly poor data to like your rich data sets in a catalog, which is, arguably a challenging thing, you can sit on a really comprehensive catalog and you're not going to produce a lot of good results. So I think that's a really challenging piece here for a lot of like companies we work with, and one that they flagged, very, very early on in these conversations. That's partially the reason why they call us, frankly. You can Google, that doesn't scale. You can ask Copilot to figure it out. It won't scale either because just because you have a Copilot doesn't mean you have a full-on automation to pump hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands or just 100 of parts and return like results in a decent fashion. You gotta have to look at it from, okay, let's go from simple all the way to super complex and find a solution that can handle it.
Yeah. But okay, so you're saying basically you're using different work stream, different approaches, customized per customer, maybe even customized per catalog within a customer, even to basically do what a human does, to figure out multiple approaches to figure out which part is which. And that is actually a question from the audience here that ties into that, where the question from Brian is, how do you train the AI engine to fully and accurately know what is good versus bad part data? So
yeah,
yeah,
it's a really good point, and it's one of the points that I get asked a lot when I have initial discovery calls with people who messed around with with Copilot and stuff like this, because oftentimes you look at the result and you're like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. Then you start digging a little bit and you start to realize that it produces a lot of garbage, right, in these calls or like in these prompts. It's a bit of, you're going to have to understand what kind of information is relevant about parts. We did this basically by, if you think about it, a lot of people on this call are probably familiar with like parts classification and stuff like this. And what we did is we essentially went ahead and we trained the AI with very good descriptions of like how humans would describe spare parts, right? And it may make sense because if you're looking for a valve, you don't need a shoe size or stuff like this pulled in randomly, right? Like you should work with an AI that understands from a classification point of view that like this particular part or this particular like, material that you're looking for only needs 15 attributes. The rest of it is, you can source it in too if they exist, but like you should essentially have a pre-trained model. And that's what we did. We basically grabbed essentially everything that describes parts in a meaningful way, pumped it into the AI and, brought it to a point where it actually knows what to dismiss because it is familiar with like what describes a part. Bearing is a good example. When it goes to standard parts and stuff like this, generic parts is actually relatively simple. And then when it comes to manufactured engineered parts, we can cover that too, but that's because we spend a lot of time thinking about it. I think this is a good point in the sense of like, where's the difference between an AI like this that is, pre-trained and then, or like, custom built or custom trained for that matter. And essentially like, I don't know, an agnostic AI that you just ask produce as much attributes as possible. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. It does touches on sort of the custom approach versus just asking ChatGPT, right? And I think this happens a lot with, I would say, more easy or more information dense categories or product categories like fashion or electronics. And I can imagine that the problem is even larger for information sparse environments where a ball bearing or a bolt or a hydraulic pump or whatever part you have, there is so little known about a part, right? It is not known on Google. It is very sparsely described, if at all, in your SAP master data. Your materials master only has a title, and in that title, there's all kinds of concatenated max 40 character limit product descriptions, which basically takes a custom dictionary to figure out for humans, let alone for AI. So I'm curious how you sort of see that with customers who try to solve this with a Copilot integration or a ChatGPT integration or any sort of base model integration, and how they deal with that.
Yeah, it's wild. It's like him try. I like it a lot because it's a POC before people ask us to do a POC, right? It's almost like, okay, I prove the concept of AI doing something for me, but then I start to realize usually it's actually fairly challenging. So if you look at it from a ChatGPT perspective and stuff like this, they actually are okay. In quite a few of these categories, they produce reasonable results. The problem is to get an AI to the point where it produces a somewhat deterministic result, right? I mean, if we go ahead and we type a prompt into ChatGPT and we repeat it 5 times, most likely we have 5 different results. And the reason why that is because it's a generic model, so to say, right? I mean, this is not really pre-trained. It's not really like hardened. There are no safe rail guards and stuff like this to it to actually ensure quality of the data. So I see a lot of people showing me prompts and then the results, and then I ask them to type it in again, and it's a completely different result. And, it's frustrating because in a weird way, it kind of proves the concept of AI doing what it's supposed to do. It's just not, you cannot reproduce it really. And then if you cannot reproduce it, how good is it really? And that's oftentimes when we get a call, and I think it can get you relatively far, but your issues are, like I said, can you reproduce it? Can you exclude sources? Can you ramp by basically putting in 1,000 parts instead of one? How did you check it, right? I mean, and what kind of data sources does the model have access to? So for example, you can of course say ChatGPT grab the internet, which that is a good way. This is one of the ways we certainly use. But can you connect it to your catalog, or can the company you're working with connect it really to like a curated catalog of like parts information? Because at the end of it, you have to ask yourself, where's the information stored that I want to grab? Can it analyze data sheets? And if it can analyze data sheets, how I'm going to be able to transfer a million data sheets or technical sheets to like an AI like this? And that's where things get sticky. So I think it's a powerful tool. It helps you in many, many ways, or it can help you, but getting it ramped into production is very challenging.
Yeah. I think that it is great that there is AI and there's ChatGPT. Like you said at the beginning, like it opened lots of doors. Like suddenly AI is a thing again, and people see the potential, maybe too much potential, but they now see the potential of AI. But especially in production environments, as you mentioned, like in a proof of concept or in a single search, has good results, or at least it confidently presents results. But the question, of course, is how do you make sure that the 10 ball bearings that you give it, whether that is just a very sparse information title or an image or a combination of data sources, how do you make sure that it classifies and enriches and cleanses all of those different parts in the same way, and it consistently? That's the word I was looking for. So how does it classify those parts consistently, and how does it enriches those parts consistently?
It's an interesting time, so to say, to look at it from a person who, like I said, we were working with AI before the big ChatGPT moment, and we love ChatGPT because it was probably the biggest thing in marketing that happened for us. And I think it's almost like, I don't know if you look at the Yukon territories where people were like washing gold in the river manually. I mean, they're not around anymore because people built gold mines, right? Automated, industrialized gold mines. And it's a bit the same thing, right? I mean, you can, of course, go there and mine gold at the river with like custom prompts and stuff like this. Then something changes because someone says, look at this. All of a sudden, your entire like prompting has to be reworked, right? You don't really have a pipeline of processing the data. Someone says to you, look, can you also, I don't know, pass the information in a certain taxonomy? Then you look at your taxonomy and all things get like wonky. So it's great until, stuff gets really, really serious. And then, so for example, if you look at utilizing AI like this as part of your PIM, as part of your classification or new parts creation process and stuff like this, I mean, you're opening obviously Pandora's box in the sense of like, okay, what do we want to expose to these API endpoints, right? And yeah, so I like it a lot because I think we get a lot of more educated customers in these calls and stuff like this. And of course that helps us. But I understand sometimes really the frustration, right? When they say, hey, this should be so easy because I fixed this with Copilot. And you say, let's take a look here and like, let's scale into production. And then, the conversation turns usually at first a little bit into rocket territory, and then people start to understand it. But I'm all for it, right? I mean, if it solves your problem, and arguably there are companies that can get all the way with Copilot and things like this, it's just not quite as many as people think.
Yeah. Isn't it also, in that sense, what we see is that it's also dangerous? I mean, what is dangerous in the world of product data, right? We're not saving lives in that sense. But what happens with customers is that they deploy AI without really thinking about or realizing the downstream effects of introducing synthetic data, right? You ask ChatGPT to replace all the attributes or cleanse all the product data in your catalog, and suddenly you don't know what is true data and what is synthetic data. And especially if the reliability of that data is lower than what you actually expected, then suddenly you do not trust, or you cannot trust any attribute in your catalog anymore. Have you seen cases like that in real life? And how does that then, how do you actually go forward when that happens?
It's wild because you really can mess up super, super quick. And not only do you mess up super, super quick, you also paying for it, right? I mean, with like API with tokens and stuff like this. But I think the problem is people use AI for all sorts of things when it comes to cleansing and stuff like this, right? There's this whole piece of actually, I don't know, working around your taxonomy and stuff like this, but there's also procuring data through AI. I think that's kind of like the World Cup or the Champions League of the whole game. Because if I give you a list of 100 parts and you pump it into ChatGPT and you say, change it, these are the rules, it will change it. But if you say, fill in the gaps, it may work for 10 parts, but then, depending on like how good the prompt is you build, how good like the constraints are, how good you interacted with it, how good the context is. And, in enterprise, you might actually, if you look at Copilot, you might have actually a fairly small window of like context that you can tag along with it. It might start to hallucinate. You end up in a bad spot. And the problem is, if it might hallucinate in maybe 10% of the cases, that's a lot of mistakes you're introducing, right? And you can say, well, look, but at least I have attribute data for like, this kind of stuff. But really, I mean, why are you doing it in the first place if the data isn't accurate? And so how do you go about it? Well, it isn't so easy. This is why enterprise AI exists in a sense where people are not just worrying about building prompts and stuff like this, but also what kind of like constraints they put into the model in the first place before you actually start working with it. And then what kind of data they actually make available to the whole thing. Because like I said, what if you don't control the data that has been pulled from and it just pulls data randomly from eBay or like Craigslist, right? You have an attribute all of a sudden, but there's absolutely no sense of curation and or checking if there was an attribute you even wanted or like, if it was ground truth for it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you're not even talking about would anyone ever deliberately poison data, but it's very easy to poison those AIs and LLMs as well. If you want to maybe target a certain industry, like maybe the nuclear industry in some specific region or language, you might poison the data so that you suddenly get bad advice and you connect the wrong valves in the wrong way.
It's not even such a fabricated case because if you look at SEO, for example, right? I mean, essentially websites and portals and web shops are more and more, essentially trying to target agents, agentic AI. So how good are they at rooting it out or, at actually like mitigating that? I don't know, but you don't know either. But it's your data. So it's one of these things where you have to make a decision, right? I mean, do I trust it? And I think there's a sentiment in the market to just say, okay, let's do gold mining and figure out the consequences later. But there's not really a walk back.
Yeah. We have another question. It's a follow-up from Brian regarding so his question is, it would seem that the model could be trained using additional feeder data that represents the attribute's fitness, so pick lists, etc. So that's, I think, in addition to the previous question regarding accurately finding product data. I think the answer is yes, right? It is easy. Maybe tying into that is sort of classification, right? So if you have a product data model, if you're using a product data model that is an industry standard, like a GS1 standard or something similar, you can use their product data model to first classify items to a certain category, which means they then can inherit the product data model, the attribute model from that category.
It's a good point, so for us, I mean, it's when I go about like the risks of it all, it's not like we haven't been exposed to it, right? Or like we haven't run into this. One of the big issues that we had too is like, okay, do we trust our own data? And I think with AI, you actually have a fairly good option to just essentially say, okay, AI, how much do you trust yourself in the data that you provide, right? I mean, you can almost, if you look at food in the grocery shop, right, how the A, B, C, D, essentially like a score level of like how healthy the food is. If you think about it and you actually come up with a reasonable approach of doing this, I guess we did, but we do this for a business, for a living, right? You can actually say, look, this source is Parker, or the source is Siemens Industry Mall, right? I mean, we should really trust this data because, I mean, this is the source, right? And then you have various degrees of like, okay, we sourced or I assembled the data out of like 5 different sources, all the way from, tier 2 shops to, I don't know, dubious shops, depending on like how it goes down. And obviously that has to be reflected in a scoring for it all. But that's how we go about it, right? By essentially saying, look, there's a data point here and we can hand it over to you, but you have to make a decision, right? If you want to add this to your system. And in some instances you may want to, and in some instances you can decide not to. But here's the data.
And if I mean, there's actually another comment from Brian. So thanks, Brian, for all that interaction. So he actually has a suggestion when it comes to sort of a corrector versus a cleaner of product company specific data. Instead of rather have the AI engine actually be fed or trained using predefined data, such as values for attributes as the fix data for the parts library. So yeah, indeed mapping it to pick lists.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we started doing originally and I kind of walked back from is not even that we don't offer that anymore, but we had a lot of companies initially calling us and say, hey, I have 1 million parts. Can you enrich the data? Or can you clean the data? And we said, sure, it's not a big deal. Let's do it. Now, we still do that and it's still great fun or not, depending on what you're looking at. But one of the differences is, and goes a little bit to the Brian comment, right? I mean, you have users who want to research this ad hoc, right? You click on a button, and in this particular moment, you want an AI agent to actually look at the data and start investigating it. So what is that agent going to do? It's essentially replicating, what Brian would do when he's Googling or when he's investigating this kind of stuff. They just do it in the moment. So, and I think this is a cool approach, so to say, between a snapshot of like the data that, you bought 6 months ago because you pumped your 1 million parts into an AI and it returned data versus Brian clicks on a button and the AI marches, right? And it essentially procures all the data that's relevant because, it's essentially doing an active investigation in this particular day and time, in the moment, really, right?
Yeah. But I think it's indeed just one of the workflows added to the whole toolbox of workflows and approaches you have to take as a human when you're trying to like classify a product or identify a product or enrich a product. But I think similarly to an AI deployment where it is just a one tool in a toolbox of many tools to use when you're trying to determine which ball bearing is which. Maybe if we are coming up on time. Yeah. So with that said, like maybe is there a specific customer case you want to highlight or where you see the benefits of applying the data cleansing and identification? And how do you think that would impact the product data for the people watching? Or if they would like to start, where should they start?
For me, I think when I look at AI in this context and like, what it can do for you, it's almost like when I look at Stephan, he has eyes, he has ears, he has a mouth, he has hands and stuff like this, right? It's modalities in the AI world, right? It's a partner, it's an agent, and it actually can cover more and more. So the AI can look at images, right? It can extract parts identifiers out of it, can start working with it. Stephan can read a ginormous dictionary in like no time, right? He can actually use his hands to put all of this together. He can go to documentation. Thing is, how much can you do research in a day? All right, I might take 2 minutes for a simple part, might take 45 minutes. I think it really in the past it used to be okay. Let's I don't know, enhance parts data for the sake of it or like for like a particular project and stuff like this. And I think we're gravitating more towards, sure, we can still do this, but at the same time, if you run into a problem where you need the information now, you can get up-to-date data relatively quickly, and you don't have to bother with it. So, and this is because AIs have more and more like modalities, more and more features, more and more capabilities. So I think there's a way of like doing these master data cleanup things, but at the same time, when you look at agentic AI and like let's just say API capabilities and stuff like this, you can just connect AI like this to your business processes in SAP, in your PIM system and stuff like this. And it will solve a lot of these problems, when you run into them. New parts creation, boom, you enrich it, you have the stuff ready to go. So I guess what I'm saying is we see a lot more companies stepping away from ginormous master data cleanup projects initially and more towards like a process oriented sourcing of information. And over time, it essentially, you get to a stage when you also source, the rest of the catalog information in there. But really it's let's support users doing great things because those are the ones that are getting frustrated. And let's essentially use every single data point that we have, documentation, images, metadata that you have. Doesn't really matter if the AI is robust enough, we can get some out of it. And then let's get to a point where we actually can start, to assess the quality of the data. And that will make us a lot more happy than to, you know, have no data whatsoever, the wrong data, or like, dubious data, because in all of these instances, it really doesn't benefit you all that much.
And I think that's a great way sort of to leave any of the attendees with advice, like where to start. You can always start getting that data in order, or at least identifying where all the data lives. Because if you know where it is, it can be provided as context to the AI, whether that is just a ChatGPT call and proceed at your own risk, or the next steps with a dedicated tool built for purpose.
And where to start, right? Look, I think it's actually super fair to start messing around with Gemini or ChatGPT. I think where stuff gets really, really iffy is when you claim that it's production ready. Because I've seen big enterprise customers move in with ChatGPT prompts and API calls into ChatGPT in all sorts of like environments, and they never make it into production because it just simply doesn't work, with like, let's just say deterministic results and all the stuff that we went over. I think it's a great POC. It can save you a lot of money if you mess around with it and you actually analyze the capabilities in a somewhat meaningful way. But there's a time and a moment when you need to talk to people who actually have a clue, right? In terms of like how to scale and all the rest. So one person to talk to is Stephan, because you can engineer a prompt, but there's a whole lot more, right? PIM systems, classification workflows, new parts creation and stuff like this. And I think a lot of time there's a reality check in there. But even for someone like Stephan, I think there's a good way of like, okay, this person has messed with AI. They have like figured out what they can do. It gives him, I think, a lot more, stuff to consult on. And at the same time, I think a lot of customers have a much better understanding of what is theoretically possible. And then you meet somewhere in the middle, right? Production grade AI that solves your problem. And, that makes a lot of business people happy.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, yes, a PIM plays an interesting role in that whole product data journey, right? It is context for an AI because it has some product data at least. And it is, in my opinion, the place where that enriched product data or that cleansed product data should land, right? If it travels to the AI and back again. And I think you're right. Like, let's start tomorrow or start today with asking ChatGPT or Gemini to cleanse your data and just play around with it. As you mentioned, it is the free point proof of concept that that anyone can basically build for themselves. I would now maybe take the time to thank you, Philipp, because we are coming up to the end of the webinar, at least for today. I know it was kind of impromptu, but I would love to continue this conversation. And for any of the attendees, if they want to continue the conversation with Philipp or with me, feel free to reach out to Philipp over LinkedIn. And maybe Philipp, how can people best reach you if they want to continue?
It's there's Partium.io, our website, but there's of course LinkedIn, and they can also reach me through you, Stephan, by the way.
Yeah.
So, and if enough people in this call are excited about this, I'm happy to we can have another session like this and essentially carry on a conversation. I think there's a lot of change in the market, and happy to discuss. And Brian, you should join us too.
Awesome. Yeah, that's for sure. Then thanks, Philipp, for joining us today. Thank you to the audience for joining us. And I hope to see you all in another webinar. There will be much more on product data, on AI. We are living in interesting times. Just make sure you don't screw up your product data with all synthetic data in the meantime. Thanks again. Have a good day, and see you in the next one.
Yeah. Take care, guys. Bye-bye. Thank you.